Imagine waking up one day and realizing that every choice you've made, every ambition, every habit, every dream was not entirely yours. At first, the thought feels absurd. After all, you've spent your life believing in freedom, freedom to decide, freedom to pursue, freedom to do whatever you want. Yet, the deeper you look, the more unsettling the realization becomes. What if much of what you cling to, defend, and even love are the very chains that keep you bound? Consider the paradox. The prison you live in is not made of steel bars or iron locks, but of comforts, identities, and attachments you've grown to cherish. You might even polish those kinds, take pride in them, and mistake their weight for strength. But deep inside, there's a quiet suspicion. What if your greatest sources of security are also your greatest obstacles to freedom? Think about the routines you follow every single day. The morning scroll through your phone, the caffeine ritual, the endless pursuit of approval from others, the pressure to succeed according to standards you never consciously chose. Each feels natural, even necessary. But isn't it strange how often what feels necessary is precisely what keeps you trapped? The truth is, humans are not only capable of adapting to confinement, we are disturbingly skilled at learning to love it. The cage becomes home. The leash becomes comfort. The weight in your shoulders becomes an identity so familiar that the thought of letting it go terrifies you. Why? Because without your chains, who would you be? This is the great paradox of freedom. People claim to want it, but most secretly fear it. For freedom is not a gentle gift, it is a terrifying abyss. It strips away excuses, safety nets, and illusions. To be free means to confront yourself without disguise, stand naked before existence, without the shields of conformity, validation, or certainty. Perhaps that's why, as Dostoevsky suggested in The Brothers Karamazov, humans often surrender freedom in exchange for comfort and certainty. Better a life of chains than the chaos of an untamed, uncertain world. But here lies the haunting question. Are the chains you love truly protecting you? Or are they suffocating the life you might have lived? Ask yourself how many of your beliefs are truly yours. How many of your desires are shaped by advertising, culture, family expectations, or the silent pressure to conform? How many of the things you call dreams are borrowed from others, disguised as your own ambitions? And if you could strip all of that away, would you recognize what remains? There is a strange comfort in being bound. The addict clings to the substance that destroys them because it also numbs unbearable pain. The perfectionist polishes their image endlessly, unable to realize that the mask suffocates the soul behind it. The worker ties their identity to productivity, mistaking exhaustion for purpose. Each of these chains feels familiar, safe, even loved. And yet, each comes with an invisible cost: the slow erosion of self. But here's the most unsettling thought of all. What if you are not merely wearing chains, but defending them? What if the very things you fight hardest to keep, your routines, your roles, your comforts, are the ones preventing you from becoming who you truly are? It is easier to love chains than to face freedom. Easier to cling to certainty than to enter the storm of possibility. Easier to play a role than to risk becoming authentic. Yet the price of ease is invisible shackles. And the tragedy is that most will never even notice them. And so, the question rises like a shadow at the edge of your consciousness. If you have learned to love your chains, how will you ever recognize your slavery? This is where our journey begins, not with answers, but with a crack in the illusion. Recognition that perhaps without realizing it, you've mistaken captivity for comfort. The first step toward freedom is not escape, it is awareness. But awareness itself is painful, even unbearable. It means acknowledging that you may have betrayed yourself for the sake of safety. So we must ask, how did we come to this point? Why do human beings repeatedly choose chains over freedom, illusion over truth, comfort over authenticity? To answer that, we must descend deeper into the hidden roots of the psyche, the teachings of philosophy, and the subtle manipulations of society itself. If the chains we wear are so heavy, so quietly corrosive, why do we cling to them so desperately? The answer is not simple, nor is it flattering. To uncover it, we must descend into the tangled depths of the psyche, where philosophy meets psychology, where instinct collides with culture, and where the self negotiates with fear. Carl Jung once wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. These words reveal one of the central truths of human nature. We are terrified of ourselves. Beneath the masks we wear our jobs, our relationships, our beliefs, there lies thorough, unpolished self, filled with contradictions, impulses, and shadows. To face it requires courage few possess. So instead, we bind ourselves to roles and identities, convincing ourselves that the mask is the face. The chain becomes the shield against the unbearable truths. That we are strangers to ourselves? Consider the shadow. Jung's concept of the repressed aspects of the psyche, those desires, fears, and instincts we bury because they conflict with the polished image we present to thwart. The more we suppress them, the heavier the chain becomes. And yet, paradoxically, we grow attached to the mask we wear. It brings us recognition, status, belonging. We learn to love prison because it protects us from rejection and isolation. But in doing so, we reject the deeper, more authentic self within. Friedrich Nietzsche, in his relentless critique of human weakness, argued that people prefer the comfort of herd morality over the terrifying task of creating their own values. To invent yourself from scratch, to carve meaning out of chaos, requires a willpower most find unbearable. Farisseer to accept prepackaged ideals handed down by societies, success, productivity, consumerism, respectability. But those ideals, however shiny, are chains. They bind us to paths that are not truly ours. Nietzsche called this submission-slave morality a way of life that hides fear of freedom behind the illusion of virtue. Arthur Schopenhauer, ever the pessimist, offered another insight. Human beings are driven by blind, insatiable will and endless striving that never brings satisfaction. To cope with this instrument, we create distractions, wealth, fame, entertainment, and countless small pleasures. Yet every distraction soon becomes routine. Every routine becomes another link in the chain. The will remains unsatisfied. The chains keep us too occupied to notice. We love our restraints because they shield us from confronting the absurd futility of endless desire. Society, of course, amplifies these tendencies. Aldous Huxley in Brave New World warned not of tyranny by force, but of tyranny by pleasure. His dystopia did not rely on whips and prisons but on entertainment, drugs, and distractions so intoxicating that people gladly surrendered their freedom. Sound familiar? In the modern world, our chains are not forged by oppressors, but by algorithms, advertisements, and endless streams of dopamine-inducing distractions. We learn to crave what enslaves us. We confuse stimulation for fulfillment, comfort for happiness. And when the glow fades, we tighten the chain ourselves, seeking another hit, another distraction. Anatherizing not to face the silence, but the problem is not merely external. Society may supply the chains, but the psyche willingly accepts them. Why? Because freedom is not merely difficult. It is unbearable. Jean-Paul Sartre called it the condemnation of freedom, the inescapable truth that we are free to choose, yet bear the full weight of responsibility for those choices. To live authentically means accepting that no authority, no ideology, no tradition can ultimately tell us who we are or what we must do. And this radical freedom terrifies us. So we seek escape routes, rules, systems, and beliefs that reduce the burden of choice. In other words, we choose chains because they relieve us from Thebes of freedom. Viktor Frankl, writing from the horrors of the concentration camps, observed that the last Ophiman freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude toward any given circumstance. Yet even admitted that this freedom is daunting. For if you can always choose your response, you cannot hide behind excuses. Responsibility is total, and responsibility is heavy. So instead, many people trade it for the comfort of victimhood, routine, or conformity. To put it plainly, the problem lies not only in the existence of chains, but in our willingness to toll of them. They provide order where there is chaos, identity where there is confusion, certainty where there is doubt. But beneath that comfort, a deeper cost accumulates: the slow erosion of authenticity, the quiet death of the self. Think about the person who clings to a toxic relationship because it feels familiar, or the worker who defines their worth by their job title, terrified of losing the chain that also imprisons them. Think about the millions who scroll endlessly on devices, convinced that they are choosing freely, while in reality their attention is hijacked by algorithms fine-tuned to exploit their psychology. Each example reveals the same hidden truth. The chains persist not because they are imposed, but because they are embraced. And here we arrive at the disturbing heart of the problem. If you love your chains, how will you ever break them? If you see them not as restraints but as parts of your identity, how will you even recognize their weight? This is not merely a personal struggle, but a collective one. A society that teaches people to love their chains ensures they will never rebel. As long as Thepperson feels like home, the warden need not exist. The hidden problem is not oppression, it is complicity. The enemy is not outside, it is within, and the battle, if there is one, will not begin with revolution in the streets, but with confrontation, the soul. But before we imagine rebellion, we must first look at the cost of inaction. What happens when these chains remain unbroken? What is the price of a life spent in bondage disguised as freedom? To answer this, we must turn to the unseen consequences, the silent, creeping coasts that shape not only our personal destinies, but the destiny of entire civilizations. What happens when the chains you've learned to love remain unbroken? What does it cost, not in money, not in reputation, but in the very fabric of your being? The answer is subtle, insidious, and often invisible until it is too late. The consequences creep in quietly, like shadows that lengthen with the setting sun, till suddenly the light is gone, and you realize you've been living in darkness all along. At first, the chains seem harmless. A routine here, a distraction there, a habit of thinking or behaving that offers comfort. But slowly, imperceptibly, they shape the architecture of your mind. Neural pathways strengthen around repetition, carving grooves into the brain like water eroding stone. The more you repeat an action, the more natural it feels, and soon what was once a choice becomes an unconscious compulsion. This is the essence of addiction, whether toe substances, validation, or screens. The transformation of freedom into reflex, of possibility into programming. Cognitive psychology tells us that the brain craves efficiency. Habits automate action, freeing mental energy for other tasks. But this efficiency comes at a price. When habits are chosen unconsciously or worse, implanted by cultural conditioning, they narrow your field officeability. You no longer ask, "What do I want?" Instead, you ask, "What is expected? What is he? What is familiar?" Slowly, your identity fuses with the chains you wear. You forget you've ever had a choice at all. And here lies one of the most dangerous consequences: learned helplessness. First identified by psychologist Martin Seligman. This phenomenon describes the state in which repeat experience of constraint or failure teach individuals that they are powerless, even when opportunities for freedom appear. The dog shocked repeatedly in a cage eventually stops trying to escape, even when the door is left open. Humans, too, stop questioning their chains, even when the key lies within reach. We adapt to bondage so completely that the thought of leaving feels absurd. But this helplessness is not merely psychological. It spills into every domain of life. Relationships stagnate as people cling to roles that no longer serve them partners, bound by fear of solitude. Families locked in patterns of silence, friendships maintained out of habit rather than love. Workplaces become prisons where individuals grind away, believing that exhaustion equals virtue, productivity equals worth. Even nations fall into cycles of conformity, where entire populations mistake consumerism for freedom and distraction for happiness. Nietzsche warned of this decay when he wrote of the last man, a figure who seeks on like comfort, safety, and mediocrity, avoiding risk, passion, and transcendence. The last man has no chains to break because he no longer sees them. He wears them like jewelry, proud of his conformity, proud of his emptiness. Does this sound familiar? Look around at a culture where outrage is mass-produced, where pleasure is commodified, where people are lulled into passivity by glowing screens. The last man is not a distant warning. He is already here. The unseen consequences extend further. By clinging to chains, we not only betray ourselves, we betray the generations that follow. Children grow up watching parents who have a compass compliance with wisdom, comfort with fulfillment. They inherit not only the genetic material of their ancestors, but the psychological patterns, the unspoken lessons about what it means to live. The child of a fearful parent learns fear. The child of a conformist learns obedience. The cycle continues. Each generation adds new links to the chain. But perhaps the most devastating consequence is existential. Jean-Paul Sartre argued, "Thachwin, we deny our freedom. We fall into what he called bad faith, the self-deception, pretending we are not free. Pretending that roles and labels define us. Bad faith is the quiet murder of authenticity, and it breeds a peculiar emptiness, a hollow gnawing that no amount of distraction can fill. You may feel it late at night, in the moments when the noise fades, insolence returns. A whisper that says, this isn't really you. This isn't the life you were meant to live. And yet, instead of listening, most people tighten the chains. They dive back into distraction, into consumerism, into anything that keeps them from facing that whisper. But the whisper grows louder with time until it manifests as anxiety, depression, or despair. Modern psychiatry, as Gabor Mate notes, often treats these conditions as pathologies to be medicated, but perhaps they are not pathologies at all. Perhaps they are signals the psyche's way off, screaming that it is suffocating under chains it's never consented to wear. The unseen consequences are not dramatic explosions, but slow erosions. Dreams shrink, creativity withers. The spark of vitality dims. You wake up one day and realize you are living someone else's script, following a path laid out by forces you never questioned, and the tragedy is not that you were forced into it, but that you embraced it willingly. Let us not underestimate the collective cost. A society of chained individuals is a society without vision. Innovation stalls, art loses depth, politics becomes theater, and communities fracture into isolated units of consumption. The soul of a civilization dies not with violence, but with sodation, with people so content in their cages that they forget the sky even exists. And so, the question becomes unavoidable. If the consequences of loving your chains are so devastating, why do we persist? Why do we accept emptiness over authenticity, sedation over struggle, illusion over truth? Perhaps the answer is simple, because the alternative is terrifying. To break free is to face uncertainty, responsibility, and the vast, uncharted wilderness of freedom. Yet, despite the terror, there are always those who rebel, those who hear the whisper and choose to follow it, no matter the cost. History remembers them as visionaries, prophets, revolutionaries, or even outcasts. They are the ones who dared to break the chains others could not even see. Which brings us to the crucial turning point. How does one rebel? How do you break the chains, Yov? Learn to love without collapsing into despair? To answer this, we must explore the nature of rebellion, not against governments or systems, but against the deepest prisons of the soul. Rebellion rarely begins with a dramatic act. More often, it begins with a question whispered in the dark, what if this is not who I really am? That question is dangerous. It shakes the foundations of the prison you've built, forcing you to confront the possibility that the life you've grown accustomed to is not yours at all, but a carefully maintained illusion. To rebel is not first toss storm barricades, is to refuse the silent contract you signed with your own chains. Breaking free begins not with external change but with inner confrontation. Jung insisted that noon becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the first act of rebellion, turning inward. facing the shadow and acknowledging the parts of yourself you've denied, the anger you suppress, the desires you disown, the fears you bury. These are the hidden sources of your bondage. Until you face them, you will mistake their canes for your own identity. But here lies the paradox. Freedom is not found by rejecting the shadow, but by integrating it. Rebellion is not the destruction of what you fear within yourself, but the embrace of it. There a cognition that wholeness requires, acknowledging even the parts that terrify you. To accept your darkness is to disarm it. To deny it is to remain its slave. Nietzsche spoke of the need to create one's own values, to become what he called Dobermensch, not a superhuman in strength, but one who dares to shape meaning in a meaningless world. This, too, is rebellion, refusing to inherit ready-made values from society and instead forging your own. It is terrifying because once you admit that no one else can define your path, you can no longer hide behind excuses. But it is also liberating because first time you are no longer living by borrowed scripts. How then does one practice such rebellion? Not in grand gestures alone, but in small acts of defiance against the patterns that keep you chained. Imagine refusing to measure your worth by productivity, even in a culture that idolizes busyness. Imagine turning off the endless distractions, sitting with silence, even when silence feels unbearable. Imagine saying no to the expectations that others have placed upon you, and saying yes to the uncertain voice within. Each of these acts, though small, is revolutionary. To rebel is also to embrace discomfort. The chains persist because they are comfortable, familiar, and safe. Breaking them requires stepping into uncertainty. Sartre called this anguish the vertigo of freedom, the dizzying realization that nothing and no one can determine your choices but you. Most people run from this anguish, mistaking it for failure. But in truth, it is the way to authenticity. Freedom feels like terror at first, but terror is simply the absence of chains. History offers countless examples of rebels who lived this truth. Socrates, who refused to betray his principles, even when it meant drinking poison. Giordano Bruno, who chose the stake over silence. Dostoevsky, who faced a mock execution and afterward wrote with piercing clarity about the preciousness of life. Each of them understood that rebellion is not a path to safety but to authenticity. To break the chains is to risk everything: comfort, belonging, even life itself. But what is the alternative? To live without ever having truly lived. On a more personal scale, rebellion can look quieter, but no less radical. It might mean walking away from a job that suffocates you, even if society applauds you for keeping it. It might mean ending a relationship that feels safe but dead, rather than remaining out of fear of loneliness. It might mean confronting the traumas you've buried, rather than drowning them in distraction. These choices are not glamorous. They are painful, disorienting, and often misunderstood bitos, still clinging to their chains. But they are the birth pains of freedom. Still, rebellion is not simply destruction. To break the chains is not enough. You must also create something in their place. Otherwise, you risk falling into despair, floating an anchored void of meaninglessness. This is why Nietzsche insisted that true rebellion is not merely rejection, but creation, the act of giving, shaped to your life according to your own will. To break free is not just to say no. It is to find a deeper yes, a commitment to values, projects, or ways off bung that you choose with clarity and intention. But here lies a caution. Rebellion is not a one-time event. The chains are subtle, adaptive, and seductive. Break one, and another will tempt you. Destroy a prison, and the psyche will try to build another in its place. To be free is not a permanent state, but an ongoing practice in eternal vigilance against the forces of comfort, fear, and conformity that threaten to rebind you. Perhaps the greatest rebellion of all is to embrace this struggle without hope of final victory. As Camus suggested in his myth of Sisyphus, even if the boulder rolls back down the hill, the act of pushing it can still be an expression of defiance, even joy. Freedom is not about winning one scene for all. It is about choosing again and again. It's not to love your chains. So rebellion is not glamorous. It is painful, lonely, and endlessly demanding, but it is also the only path toward authenticity. The alternative is far worse: a life anesthetized by comfort, suffocated by roles, diminished by illusions. And yet, one question still lingers, like a riddle at the edge of consciousness. If rebellion is possible, what is the ultimate truth it reveals? Beyond the breaking of chains, beyond the struggle of freedom, is there a final realization, one that reframes everything we thought when you? To answer this, we must step into the deepest layer of all, the ultimate truth of freedom itself. Imagine for a moment that every chain has been broken, the masks stripped away, the distractions silenced, the roles abandoned. You stand naked before existence itself, without illusions, without anyone else to blame. At first, this moment feels like a liberation, the intoxicating rush of possibility. But then the weight settles in, heavy and deniable. If I am free, then everything depends on me. This is the paradox of freedom. We dream of it as a gift, a release from suffering, a wide-open horizon. Yet when it arrives, it feels less like wings and more like a burden. To be free is not to escape responsibility, it's to shoulder it completely. No system, no ideology, no authority can tell you what you must do. You are the author now, and every choice is final, irreversible, yours alone. Is it any wonder that so many people flee back into the comfort of their chains? Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that man is condemned to be free, condemned because freedom is inescapable. Even refusing to choose is still a choice. Even silence is still a voice. You cannot escape freedom. You can only deny it, cover it, disguise it under the comforting illusion of chains. But the truth remains. Every moment you are free. And that freedom is terrifying. The ultimate truth is this: the chains you learned to love were never truly chains at all. They were choices you made unconsciously, choices handed to you by culture, choice reinforced by fear. Once you see this, the prison dissolves. The door was always open. The question was never whether you were free, but whether you were willing to bear the responsibility that comes with freedom. Here is the haunting beauty. Once you accept this truth, freedom ceases to feel like a curse. It becomes sacred. The weight of responsibility transforms into the dignity of authorship. You stop waiting for life to hand you meaning, and instead you begin to create it. You realize that freedom is not the absence of chains, but the courage to choose them consciously. Some responsibility will still bind your relationships, commitments, values, but they are no longer prisons. They are ravos you choose, knowing fully their cost. Nietzsche's challenge echoes here: to live in such a way that you could will your life eternally, over and over, exactly as it is. This is the test of freedom, not to escape suffering, but to embrace it as inseparable from joy. Not to deny fate, but to love it amor fati. Imagine saying yes, Ned, only to the triumphs of your life, but to its failures, its humiliations, its heartbreaks. Imagining embracing the totality of existence with all its contradictions and calling it good. This is Oedipus rebellion, the ultimate truth of freedom, not escape, but affirmation. And yet this realization is not abstract. It touches the smallest details of life. Tomorrow morning you may wake up to the same routines, the same obligations, the same world. But if you see them differently, everything changes. The job is no longer a chain if you know you could leave it. The relationship is no longer a prison if you remain by choice. The habit is no longer compulsion if you confront it consciously. Freedom is not in the circumstances, it is in the awareness with which you face them. But let us not romanticize too quickly. To live this way is not easy. It is lonely, because most will not follow you. It is uncertain, because no script exists. It is dangerous, because freedom threatens the illusions upon which society rests. History is littered with examples of those who paid dearly for their authenticity. Socrates burned for corrupting the youth with questions. Bruno executed for daring to dream beyond dogma. Rebels of every age who bore the cost of fliving truly. To walk this path is to accept that freedom will not make you safe. It will make you eleve. And here lies the final revelation. Freedom is not about you alone. It ripples outward. When one person dares to live authentically, it becomes a mirror for others. Your rebellion plants a seed in hoes still sleeping. They may resist it, resent it, even hate it, but they cannot unsee it. Freedom is contagious. The sight of someone who refuses to love their chains awakens the possibility that others might also be free. In this way, each act of authenticity becomes an act of quiet revolution. So where does this leave you? Alone, perhaps. Responsible, certainly. But also alive in a way few ever are. The chains are gone, the illusions shattered. What remains is raw, terrifying, and beautiful. The chance to live as the author of your own existence. Now imagine yourself standing at a crossroads. On one path, the familiar chains, comfortable, secure, unquestioned. On the other, the wilderness of freedom, risky, demanding. Most people choose the first without hesitation. But you, knowing what you know now, must choose consciously. The question is not whether you are free. The question is whether you will dare to live as if you were. And so, the ultimate truth stands before you like a mirror. You are free. You always were. The only chains that ever existed were the ones you chose to love. The door is open. The world waits. The weight of authorship rests on your shoulders. What will you create with it?